Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
With Earth Day approaching, there were gains made on the environmental front here in Maryland. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Among those affecting the eastern shore will be greater oversight of sludge from what are called DAF tanks. Meanwhile, there was an effort to prioritize what are known as living shorelines. With us on the phone this afternoon is Alan Gerard. He's the Eastern Shore Director of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to actually directly to this DAF tanks, if you can describe a little bit about what they are and what kind of progress you think you've made in terms of getting these things under control.
Yeah, sure. DAF, dissolved air flotation, that's the acronym. Other folks call it these food processing residuals. You know, this is essentially the solid or semi-solid leftovers derived from the rendering of protein, including poultry, seafood, other materials. It's a product that is certified by the Maryland Department of Agriculture to be applied to farmland as a nutrient source. So it's got nutrient content. It can be used as a fertilizer to help crops grow. You know, it also smells, and that is a lot of the concern that many communities around Delmarva have been expressing. You know, folks in the Hebron area, there's a storage tank for this material there that was cited a couple years back. Concerns about the smells emanating from that tank have actually caused the Wacomico County Council to prohibit future siting of those tanks outside industrial areas. So there's a lot of community concern around the storage of the material up in Caroline County. It's been land applied near the town of Ridgely. I was actually at a hearing where one of the town council members testified before the county and said, look, you know, this is an issue that the county really needs to grab control over because it's impacting our community, our students. The smell was coming through one of the schools there. In Talbot County, there was a hearing before one of the agricultural use boards with folks complaining about the smell in their carpets and their furniture when they open the windows. One individual said, you can feel it in your teeth. So just a wide-ranging set of community members impacted by this stuff. And there's water quality impacts, too. You know, the nutrient content varies substantially. There's not good oversight of the material when it's applied to agricultural land to know if it's being applied at safe levels. And so the legislation that passed the General Assembly this session, you know, looks at that issue and it says, look, you know, we need better control over this material. And a lot of the reason why, you know, in addition to the, you know, the local community concerns, is a significant amount of the material is actually originating from out of state. You know, there's a few rendering plants located in Maryland that generate these food processing residuals that are applied to land. More than half in recent years has actually come from neighboring states into Maryland to be applied to Maryland farmland. You know, mostly because, you know, in Virginia and Delaware, you got to have a permit to handle this stuff, to store it, to apply it to land. In Maryland, you don't. So neighboring states you do, Maryland you don't. And that's what the legislation does. It says, look, if you're going to handle this material, store it, apply it to land, you need a permit from the Maryland Department of Agriculture. And the department will be able to enforce the terms of that permit. You know, right now they have the ability to go onto farms to, you know, only when authorized by a landowner to allow entry. You know, with this material, MDA will be able to go on without that authorization and make sure it's being handled safely. So hopefully this will deal with this issue in the state.
Now, in terms, by the way, of, say, the DAF tanks themselves, are those also going to be regulated, or is there, I know that you mentioned a moment ago that there's been sort of a prohibition essentially here in, say, Wacomico County, except I suppose for something that's industrialized-wise. But, I mean, do we expect that this will limit the proliferation of those kinds of tanks?
Yeah, and that's a good question. Like I said, there is a prohibition in Wacomico. Caroline County actually put a moratorium on the siting of those types of facilities in that local jurisdiction. And, this is happening across the state. Carroll County residents have been expressing concern. A lot of the local jurisdictions have wondered, is it their responsibility to deal with an agricultural material that is normally the state's purview? And so what the permit program will do is require any type of handling of the material, you'll need a permit. So that's if you're transporting it, if you're applying it to land, and if you're storing it. So the state permit would be required if you site a storage tank in a particular community. Now, importantly, the approvals associated with that siting will still fall to the local government. So you can't get the permit unless there are all local approvals for siting the tank already obtained by the permittee in advance. That's something that got written into the bill. I know the Caroline commissioners were very interested in making sure that got in there, and others who want to continue to retain this local siting authority. So it's almost a two-step. You got to have that local approval, and then you got to go get your state permit. So both of those measures together should do a good job of controlling the risks and concerns that community members experience with this stuff.
What kind of limits, by the way, are you expecting from the Department of Agriculture on farmers in terms of applying this to their fields?
Well, farmers are already subject to nutrient management plan regulations in Maryland, so that will continue. There were some in the industry that wanted to clarify the nutrient management terms that would apply to this particular material, and I thought those were good amendments to the bill. And so, when the material is applied to land, those nutrient management regulations need to be followed. What the permit will do is will enable additional protections just to make sure this unique material really has the controls applied to it to ensure that the communities and the environments are protected.
I also understand that you were pushing to try to expand the living shoreline issue in terms of trying to get more, for instance, living shore replacing some of the armored shorelines, but it didn't exactly turn out as well as you would have hoped.
Well, it was a relatively minor fix to the existing state law passed some years ago. I guess it might have been around 10 years ago that says, it is a requirement if you are going to be restoring your shoreline in the state of Maryland. The techniques that you need to use are the living shoreline techniques. A lot of folks are familiar with, the stone revetments or riprap or the hard bulkheads to help control erosion and make sure that wave energy doesn't erode the shoreline away. Those can be appropriate in high wave energy circumstances. A lot of the bay and the rivers and streams doesn't have that high wave energy and doesn't necessarily need such a robust structural control to deal with that wave energy. Where the living shoreline technique is fully appropriate, using plants, grasses, trees, along with core fiber logs and other soft controls to manage the wave energy, but also ensure that there is wildlife habitat enabled for the critters that need it. Terrapin turtles, for example, climb on shore and bury their eggs into shoreline. They can't do that if there's a bulkhead there. And that living edge, between land and water is so rich from a biological standpoint. Just looking historically over the bay, that's why we have the rich diversity of over 3,000 species here. A lot of it has to do with that land-water interface, and we keep that area natural. That provides, not only wildlife habitat, but water quality benefits as well. Filtering the water when it runs off the landscape through that last ribbon of defense. These living shorelines are critically important. So the state said some years back, you want to restore your shoreline, living shoreline is the standard that we use. Now you can get an exception from the state to put in a structural control like a revetment stone, bulkhead, but that needs that request to go around the living shoreline standard needs to be approved by MDE. What the bill said is that if you have an existing structural control, you aren't automatically eligible then to replace that existing bulkhead revetment stone structure with another structural control. It's not an automatic right. Then you would need to look at the living shoreline alternative there as well. And it's just an opportunity just to ask the question. We know there was a hard structure here, that needs replacement for whatever reason now. Is it appropriate to try and convert that to a living shoreline so that we can get those wildlife and water quality benefits that we know Marylanders want, communities want, the Bay needs? And so that bill did not make it through. It got stuck in committee. We're going to be working with the agency and see if we'll bring it back next year or not.
Also, we have, I guess it's empower incentives towards electrification. What are we doing on that level?
Well, that bill passed. We haven't been working as much in the energy space. One of the bills that was really a top priority, not only of the Bay Foundation, but also the Chesapeake Bay Commission, Maryland League of Conservation Voters, a number of partners that advocate for the environment, as well as the administration and the General Assembly itself. This is the whole Watershed Act, and this is really the major priority for the environment that I know the Moore administration was pushing, as well as the environmental community, and really looking comprehensively at the Bay restoration efforts, what's been working and what's not, and how can we really move the needle. A lot of folks, I get a lot of questions from folks saying, look, Alan, the Bay Foundation has been doing this a long time, but we're not seeing the pace and the speed of restoration. I mean, we are making progress, but people feel like it's not as slow, not as quick as it should be, given the 40, 50 years of investment. And scientists actually looked at that and said, yeah, there's an implementation gap, there's a response gap, there's concern about focusing water quality improvement in the deep trench of the Bay, which is really the anchor of the science for the Bay restoration effort. And this is an opportunity to restore our shallow water habitat and really begin to reaching a tipping point there that can not only bring back the rivers and streams, but also water quality in the deep trench as well. The scientists got together, they put a report about this out on this comprehensive evaluation of system response last spring, and that got legislators' attention. They said, yeah, we have been making these investments. What do we need to do to, reach these tipping points in targeted areas of the Bay? The scientists said, you really got to target these investments rather than having random acts of restoration being put on the landscape. And so this whole Watershed Act that passed essentially creates a pilot program to focus investment in 5 watersheds around the state. Now, the bill doesn't name those watersheds, but it sets criteria to select them, things like geography, land use diversity, also environmental justice concerns are part of the criteria that would be used to select these watersheds for investment. And then the State Department of Natural Resources, together with multiple other state agencies, would serve on an expert panel. And they would select projects from applications that communities submit. It's expected that those applications will be eligible to be received as early as this fall. And then the team would, look at the applicants, identify the 5 watersheds, and then target funding from existing conservation programs, from agriculture, wastewater, stormwater, land preservation is in there as well, really walling off certain pieces of the existing conservation funding at the state level and directing them to these 5 watersheds with a integrated state agency panel steering the investment, so that those regulatory agencies can coordinate and make sure that the investment is efficient, hitting the marks in terms of outcomes. The bill calls for expedited permitting of projects in those selected watersheds So it's really a way to foster collaboration and innovation, provide guidance, support, and the funding needed to tackle comprehensive projects, and rapidly improve, the waterways that are on the federal dirty waters list. This includes the Bay, many of the rivers and streams that drain to the Bay, targeting the effort and moving the needle on Bay restoration through the whole Watershed Act.
We've been speaking with Alan Gerard. He's the Eastern Shore Director of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Thanks very much, Don.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.